I wish I had listened to that strange feeling in my chest that morning. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a quiet hesitation that kept whispering something was off. But I ignored it, like I had ignored so many small things before. I told myself I was overthinking, that everything was normal, that my life was exactly where I wanted it to be. At that time, my world was simple. I was focused on my studies, trying to build something for myself, trying to make my parents proud. I wasn't someone who took risks or stepped out of line. I believed in routines, in doing things the right way. And maybe that's why I trusted so easily. I believed that if you were honest, if you were loyal, the people around you would be the same. And then there was him, that he wasn't perfect, but to me, he felt like safety. He knew how to say the right things at the right time. When I was stressed, he'd calm me down. When I doubted myself, he'd remind me of my worth. At least, that's what I thought back then. I built a version of him in my mind that I held onto so tightly. I never stopped to question whether it was real that we talked every day. Not just random conversations, but the kind where you share your thoughts, your fears, your plans for the future. He knew things about me no one else did. And I believed I knew him too. That was my first mistake, but slowly, things started to change. At first, it was small. Delayed replies. Short answers. Excuses that didn't quite add up. He'd say he was busy, and I understood, because life gets busy. I didn't want to be the kind of person who questions everything. I didn't want to seem insecure or controlling. So I stayed quiet, but silence has a way of growing. There were moments when I felt like I was talking to a stranger. Moments when his tone felt different, colder somehow. I'd ask if everything was okay, and he'd always say yes. He'd tell me I was overthinking again, and I'd apologize, even when I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. Still, I held on. Because when things were good, they felt really good. He could still make me smile in seconds. He could still make me feel like I mattered. And those moments were enough to make me ignore everything else. Then came that day that I had to visit another university for something important. It wasn't a big deal, just a task I needed to handle, something related to my studies. Normally, I would have asked him to come with me or at least stay on call, just to feel a little more secure in an unfamiliar place. So I told him that I remember the exact way he reacted, and it still confuses me when I think about it. He didn't seem concerned. He didn't ask many questions. He just said, "It's fine, you can handle it. You don't need anyone." At first, I thought he was just trying to encourage me, to make me independent. But something about it felt off. There was no hesitation, no protective instinct, nothing. Just a quick dismissal. That I asked him again, half joking, if he could at least stay on call while I was there. He laughed it off and said he might be busy, but I'd be fine. That word again. Fine. That I don't know why that bothered me so much. Maybe it was the way he didn't even try. Maybe it was the way he didn't care enough to pretend. Or maybe deep down, I was starting to realize something I didn't want to accept, but even then, I ignored it. The night before I went, we talked like everything was normal. He said he'd text me when he was free. He told me not to worry so much. And I believed him, because believing him was easier than questioning everything we had. The next morning, I got ready like it was any other day. I told myself this was just a small step, just another experience. I tried to shake off that uneasy feeling, but it stayed with me, quietly sitting in the background of my thoughts. Before leaving, I checked my phone. No message from him. That I told myself he was just busy. On the way there, I kept thinking about calling him, but something stopped me. I didn't want to seem needy. I didn't want to annoy him. So I stayed quiet again, just like always. When I reached the university, everything felt unfamiliar. New faces, new environment, no one I knew. I paused for a moment, taking it all in, trying to gather myself, and in that moment, I felt it again, that same quiet voice telling me something wasn't right. That I wish I had listened, but instead, I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and walked inside, not knowing that this decision, this one normal day, was about to change everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and the person I believed would never let me face anything alone. The moment I stepped into the forest, something shifted. Not around me, but inside me. The air felt heavier, quieter, like the world I knew had been left behind without any effort. I could still turn back. That option was always there. But with every step forward, it started to feel less real. They didn't walk ahead of me or behind me. Just beside me, like we had already agreed to this without saying it out loud. No rush, no pressure, just a steady pace deeper into a place that didn't ask questions. At first, no one spoke. And strangely, it wasn't uncomfortable. I was used to silence that felt cold, distant, forced. This wasn't that. This silence felt intentional, like it was giving space for something to happen. One of them broke it, not with anything dramatic, just a simple question. Something ordinary. But the way he asked it made it feel like he actually wanted to know the answer. I responded without thinking too much about it. Then another question came, slightly more personal. Then another. Before I realized it, I was talking more than I had in weeks. They didn't interrupt. Didn't try to change the subject. They stayed with every word I said, like it mattered. And that alone was enough to pull me further in. The quieter one observed more than he spoke. But when he did say something, it was precise. Almost too precise. Like he could see through the parts of me I usually kept hidden. The other one kept things moving, guiding the conversation without making it obvious. Together, they created a space where I didn't feel judged or dismissed, and that's when it started to feel dangerous, not because of them, but because of how easy it was to forget everything else that I found myself opening up about things I had buried. About how tired I was of feeling ignored. About how being in a relationship didn't stop the loneliness, it just made it harder to explain. I didn't plan to say any of it. It just came out. They didn't tell me I was overthinking. Didn't defend him. Didn't offer empty advice. They just listened, and somehow that felt more validating than anything I had experienced in a long time. For the first time in a while, I felt understood, and that realization hit harder than it should have, because it made me aware of everything I had been missing that I caught myself comparing. The way they paid attention, the way they responded, the way they stayed present. It wasn't something I chose to do. It just happened naturally, and once it started, I couldn't stop it. That was the moment I crossed another line. Not physically, not obviously, but internally. Quietly, that I was no longer just talking. I was investing. That we slowed down eventually, stopping in a small clearing where the trees opened just enough to let faint light through. It wasn't planned. It just happened, like everything else that night. That we sat down, close enough to feel each other's presence without needing to acknowledge it. No one made a move. No one needed to. The conversation shifted again, becoming softer, more personal. They asked things no one had asked me before. Not surface-level questions, but the kind that made you pause before answering. What do you actually want? One of them asked that I didn't answer immediately, because I didn't know. Or maybe I did, and I just wasn't ready to admit it. That I tried to give a safe answer, something vague, something that wouldn't reveal too much. But he didn't push. He just waited. And somehow, that silence made it harder to lie. I told the truth. Not completely, but enough that I talked about wanting to feel seen. About wanting something real again. About not recognizing the person I had become in my own life. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. One of them leaned slightly closer, not enough to make it obvious, but enough to break the invisible boundary we had been holding on to. I felt it immediately. That small shift. That quiet change in distance. That I should have moved away. That I didn't. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, fully aware of what that meant. That my mind tried to catch up, reminding me of everything this crossed, everything it risked. But my body didn't react the same way. It didn't pull back. It didn't resist, and that scared me more than anything else, because it meant I wasn't just caught in the moment. That I was choosing it. Time started to feel unclear after that. Minutes stretched, conversations blurred together, and the outside world faded even further. It felt like we existed in a space that didn't belong to anything else. At one point, I thought about leaving. The thought came suddenly, sharp and clear. This is enough. You should go. I shifted slightly, almost standing up, almost breaking whatever this was. That's when one of them spoke again. Not to stop me directly, but just enough to anchor me back. You don't have to rush, he said quietly. It wasn't controlling. It wasn't forceful, but it was effective, because he wasn't asking me to stay, that he was giving me a reason to, and I took it that I settled back without thinking too much about it, letting the moment continue, letting the line blur even further. At that point, I stopped pretending it was harmless, that I knew what this was, maybe not in a clear, defined way, but enough to understand that I was no longer just passing time. I was stepping into something I wouldn't be able to undo, and the worst part was, I didn't want to undo it, not yet. That realization settled in slowly, but once it did, there was no denying it anymore, that I wasn't thinking about going home, that I wasn't thinking about him, that I wasn't thinking about consequences, that I was just there, fully present in something that felt more real than anything I had experienced in a long time, and that was the moment I stopped looking for a way out. I don't remember how long I sat there before I finally moved. Time felt meaningless, like it had detached itself from reality. My body was still, but my mind wouldn't stop. It kept replaying fragments I didn't want, forcing me to feel everything all over again without giving me a way out. I tried to breathe normally, but even that felt unfamiliar, like I had to relearn something as basic as existing. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weak, like they didn't trust the ground beneath me. Every step I took inside my own house felt wrong. This place used to be mine. It used to feel safe. Now every corner carried a weight I couldn't escape. I looked around and nothing had changed, yet everything had. That's when I realized, it wasn't the house that felt different. It was me. That I picked up my phone again, staring at his name. For a moment, I hesitated. Not because I didn't need someone, but because I wasn't sure if he was still that person for me. Still, I called. It rang longer than it should have. When he finally answered, his voice sounded distracted, like I had caught him in the middle of something more important. That I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out the way I needed them to. My voice felt small, fragile, like it could break at any second. I told him something was wrong. I told him I needed him. There was a pause on the other end, not the kind that feels supportive, but the kind that feels distant. He asked a few questions, but not the ones that mattered. Not the ones that showed he understood, and in that moment, something inside me sank even deeper. That I needed warmth. I needed presence. What I got was hesitation. Excuses. He said he couldn't come right away. Said he was busy. Busy. That word echoed in my head in a way that didn't make sense. How could anything be more important than this? How could I feel so alone while talking to someone who was supposed to care about me? I ended the call without saying much more. Not because I was okay, but because I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. I wasn't his priority anymore. Maybe I hadn't been for a while. The silence returned, heavier than before. This time, it wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what was missing. Support. Comfort. Love. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to create some sense of security, but it didn't work. You can't replace what's supposed to come from someone else. Hours passed in a blur. At some point, I found myself going through his social media, something I hadn't done in a long time. Maybe I was looking for reassurance. Maybe I was looking for proof that I still mattered. What I found instead felt like another blow I wasn't prepared for. There were pictures. Comments. Interactions that didn't make sense. A pattern I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just distance. It wasn't just busyness. It was something else. Someone else. That I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with every second. My mind tried to deny it, tried to come up with explanations that would make it hurt less. But the truth has a way of making itself clear when you least want it to. He wasn't just absent. He was somewhere else, giving his time, his attention, his care, to someone who wasn't me, and just like that, the little strength I had left started to crumble. That it wasn't just betrayal. It was timing. It was the fact that on the worst day of my life, when I needed him the most, he wasn't just unavailable, he was emotionally invested somewhere else. That realization cut deeper than I expected. It made everything feel heavier, more personal, more permanent. That I put my phone down slowly, like it weighed more than I could carry. I didn't cry right away. Again, it was that same numbness. That same emptiness that swallowed everything before it could turn into emotion. I felt hollow, like there was nothing left inside me to break. Days started blending into each other after that. I stopped answering calls. I stopped opening messages. The outside world felt too loud, too demanding, too unaware of what I was carrying inside. I avoided mirrors because I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. Her eyes looked tired. Not just physically, but deeply, like something inside them had dimmed that I questioned everything. My worth. My judgment. My ability to trust. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong, even though a part of me knew I hadn't done anything to deserve any of it. But pain doesn't listen to logic. It finds its own way to settle inside you, convincing you that somehow, it's your fault. Nights were the hardest. That's when the silence grew louder. That's when the thoughts came back stronger. I would lie awake, staring into the dark, wishing I could turn my mind off, even for a moment. But it never stopped. Not completely, that I felt disconnected from everything. From people. From reality. From myself. Like I was watching my life from a distance, unable to step back into it, and somewhere in that endless cycle of silence and thought, one truth became impossible to ignore: that I had survived what happened to me, but I wasn't living anymore. For a long time, I stopped trying to feel anything. Days passed, then weeks, and everything blended together in a quiet, heavy blur. I woke up, went through the motions, and went back to sleep without really living in between. People talked to me, asked if I was okay, but I learned how to answer without saying anything real. "I'm fine" became my shield, even when it felt like the biggest lie I had ever told. But something was different now. Before, when things hurt, I used to run toward him. I used to believe that no matter how bad things got, he would be there to pull me back together. That belief was gone. And without it, I was forced to face everything on my own first. It felt impossible. There were moments when the weight of everything became too much. Not just what happened that day, but everything that came after. The silence. The betrayal. The realization that I had trusted someone who didn't even respect me enough to be honest. That it wasn't just heartbreak, that it was the collapse of everything I thought was real. That I started questioning myself in ways I never had before. Wondering if I missed obvious signs. Wondering if I ignored things on purpose. Wondering how I let someone get so close to me without truly knowing who they were. Those thoughts were exhausting, but slowly, something shifted, not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. Just small changes that I didn't notice immediately. One day, I realized I had gone a few hours without thinking about him. Another day, I noticed that the pain didn't feel as sharp as before. It was still there, but it wasn't controlling every part of me anymore, and that scared me a little, because for so long, pain was the only thing that made me feel connected to what happened. Letting it fade felt like I was losing something important. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, that I wasn't losing anything, that I was finally starting to take myself back, that I stopped checking my phone for his messages. I stopped wondering what he was doing or who he was with. The questions that once consumed me started to feel irrelevant. Not because I got answers, but because I realized I didn't need them anymore. Closure didn't come from him, that it came from understanding that he was never capable of giving me what I needed. That truth was harsh, but it was freeing. That I also stopped blaming myself. That was the hardest part. For a long time, I carried this quiet guilt, like maybe I could have done something differently. Maybe I could have prevented everything if I had been more careful, more aware, less trusting. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Trusting someone isn't a mistake, believing in someone isn't a weakness. The mistake was his, not mine. and what happened to me was not something I chose, not something I deserved, and not something that defines who I am. Accepting that didn't erase the pain, but it changed how I carried it. That it stopped feeling like a burden I had to hide and started feeling like something I survived. There was a day when I saw his name again, not directly, not in a message, but somewhere I couldn't avoid. For a second, everything paused. The memories, the emotions, the version of myself that once cared so deeply, but instead of breaking down, I just looked at it, and felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No longing, just distance, and in that moment, I realized how far I had come, that he wasn't a part of my story anymore, that he was just a chapter that ended, that I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to hear an apology. I didn't need him to understand what he did, because I understood now. That I understood my worth in a way I never had before. Not the kind of worth that depends on someone else choosing you, but the kind that exists no matter who stays or leaves. That I started focusing on things I had ignored for too long. My goals, my studies, my future. The parts of my life that actually mattered, the parts that no one could take away from me. That it wasn't easy, there were still bad days. Days when everything came rushing back without warning. Days when I felt that same heaviness in my chest. But those days didn't last forever anymore, they passed, and each time they did, I felt a little stronger. That I stopped seeing myself as someone who was broken. That I started seeing myself as someone who endured something and kept going anyway. That difference changed everything. That I didn't become fearless, that I didn't suddenly trust people again, but I became more aware. More grounded. More certain of what I deserve and what I will never tolerate again. And maybe that's what growth actually looks like, not forgetting what happened, not pretending it didn't hurt, but refusing to let it control who you become. That if there's one thing I know now, it's this: the worst moments of your life don't get to decide your future, the people who betray you don't get to define your worth, and the pain you feel today won't last forever. Even if it feels like it will. That day changed me. There's no denying that, but it didn't end me. That it didn't take my future. That it didn't take my voice, because I'm still here, and no matter what happened, no matter who walked away or who failed me when I needed them the most, I didn't disappear. That I survived, and that means I get to decide what happens next.